Today on Evolution Woodworks, we're going to turn our basic metalworking drill press into something a little more useful for a woodworker. Stick around. I picked up this floor model drill press last year to replace the benchtop model that I've had for 20 some years, and it's been a great upgrade except for this table. It's basically just designed for metalworking and for attaching fixtures to it, and it really doesn't function well at all for woodworking. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you've seen me build makeshift tables and fences that I clamped onto the table just to get through a project, and now it's time to finally build something permanent. The main features I want to have on this are a larger table with a sacrificial plate in the center, an adjustable fence, and possibly some sort of dust collection and storage. Storage is going to be the tricky one since I can't just build a cabinet underneath it like I had with the old tabletop model, but I have a plan for that. So getting started here, I've cut out and screwed together 4 22-inch square pieces of plywood, and I cut a recess to fit around the back post of the drill press. Alright, so at first I thought maybe I was going a little bit too far, but I think once I get the fence and everything on here, it's actually going to be pretty much the right size. Only got about 2 inches over the front of the factory table. Got a decent amount of space this way, and yeah, should be a pretty good size. Now that I know the size is going to work, I glued 2 sets of plywood together for a base plate and a top plate. On the top plate, I laid out where the center will be, and then on the CNC, I cut out a sacrificial plate and a pattern for the hole that I'll cut into the top plate. Alright, so this is the center of the drill press. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out of just the top plate. Then this will be our sacrificial plate, goes in there. I'm actually going to offset that back about 1 inch off center. And what that's going to do is that's going to rotate back here, so our point's going to be up here where the drill's always going in. So it's always going to be a fresh, clean piece. And then once that side's out, you flip it over, drop that side down, and you get 2 uses out of this. So what I'm going to do is just trace this out, cut it out with a jigsaw, and then we'll take this down, run around it with the router, and get the hole perfect, clean everything up, and then this should drop right in there. A little thumb piece here to help get it in and out once it's in there. Next, I'm laying out some recesses that I'll cut in for some hinges. The hinges will connect the top to the bottom plate and act as a pivot point to tilt the table up when I need to drill holes on an angle. To make the table a little nicer to work on, I'm just going to clip the corners off on the miter saw. The factory table has holes in all 4 corners, so I'm just opening those up to 1/4 inch. Once I have the table centered and lined up where I want it to be, I'll just mark those holes from the bottom with the drill. Now back on the workbench, I'll just open those holes up to the final size and insert these 1/4-20 threaded inserts. Alright, 2 things I'm going to have to deal with. I've got my crank handle, obviously is not going to crank anymore, and the lockdown handle on the other side. Basically I'm just going to put some extensions on. We'll bring these out so I can crank from the outside and not tear everything up. The crank handle just has a set screw to remove, but for the lockdown handle, I need to cut the head off of a rivet to take the handle off. Once those were removed, I moved over to the metal shop, which is still a bit of a disorganized nightmare, and I cut and shaped the extension rods to fit the handles. Once I had the extensions fitting well, I made 2 bearing blocks out of oak and bolted the base plate to the factory table.
With the table locked down, I made sure the extensions were running straight and attached the blocks to the underside of the table.
All right, that'll do it for the base. Now I need to put some laminate on the top, and then we can start cutting in our T-track and start working on the fence.
I cut some laminate to size and applied some contact cement to both the laminate and the tabletop, and once it tacked up, I glued it all down. And yes, I know I should have a mask on, so there's no need to remind me in the comments. I did have the windows open, so I get points for that, right? Anyhow, after I rolled that out, I trimmed it flush with the router, and then I cut some dados in for the T-track. And finally, attached the top to the base plate with the hinges one last time. Now, with a good test of the crank, you can see this thing is super stable-ish.
Before we go any further, I think I need to fix that. I don't actually want to bolt it to the floor because I don't know if this is where it's going to live permanently, so I'm just going to make some sort of feet for it to get a little wider base and hopefully stabilize that. See what we can do.
For now, I decided to just lag bolt it to some 2x4s to give it a little wider stance and a little more stability. Once I know for sure where its permanent home is, I'll bolt it to the floor there.
All right. Not perfect, but a lot better than it was. So before we get into our fence, while we're still waiting on our T-track and everything to show up, I need to come up with the arms for the sides here that'll help hold this thing up when we're doing angles. I think I'm going to lay something out on the computer, maybe cut it out on the CNC so I have something a little better than just a straight bar there. But
If you haven't already done it, now would be a great time to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. It lets me and YouTube know that you like what you're watching, and it does make a big difference in growing the channel. I greatly appreciate all your support. Now back to the build. Thanks.
all right, looks like those are going to work, so we'll get them cleaned up and get them installed in the morning.
The tables actually have a slight warp to them, and they just weren't sitting flat, so I bought these window sash locks to hold the backside together. They have a slight cam action that should draw the two halves together tight, but they didn't quite fit the way I wanted them to, and I'll just have to come back to this later. Now that the laminate's on the top, my sacrificial plate doesn't quite sit flush, so I cut out some of the laminate to glue into the hole and raise that plate up flush. Now, it's perfect. For the dust collection port, I needed something that would come out the back and to the side so it misses the main support post. I drew this up in Fusion 360, and after almost 15 hours on the 3D printer, I had exactly what I needed. I cut some plywood strips for the fence, and after a quick test fit, I laid out the hole for the dust collection and a little recess to let the fence go as close to the post as possible. I cut those out with the jigsaw, then I screwed and glued the two halves together. To keep the fence square, I glued in 4 of these little triangular blocks, added 8 or 10 clamps to hold it, and that was it for the week.
All right, so my
T-track and all my hardware came in over the weekend. Glue is dry on the fence, so let's get that out of the clamps, get some laminate on it, and get this table finished up. Over the weekend, my order of T-track, threaded inserts, and star knobs finally showed up, and I found the latches that I had originally wanted to use here. These have a much better drawdown and latching system and should work out much better than the original ones I had. With the latches changed out, I laid out the center for the pivot arms and used a block to drill my hole square for the inserts. I used some washer head connector bolts to hold the pivot point and then installed some hanger bolts and star knobs for the sliding side of the supports. Once both supports were installed, I raised the table up to test it, tried to drop my angle finder, nice save there, and confirm my design works and I can get to 45 degrees. Now I can cut the T-track to fit and make a nice mess of aluminum chips all over the miter saw station. Then I installed the dust port, took some measurements, and drilled the holes for the T-bolts that'll hold the fence down. All right, now we're gonna put our tracks in. The first one, I'm just gonna use this 1/16 of an inch setup block. Put that in there. We'll get this one screwed down. I left about 1/8 of an inch extra in the dados so that I had room to adjust this. Get the first one locked down, and then I'll lock one end of the other one down. Put the fence in it, and use the fence to guide it so it doesn't bind up when you're moving it back and forth. Once I had the fence bolted down, I used a T-square to make sure it was aligned properly with the table, then I drilled and screwed the second track in. And then I remembered I needed one more piece of T-track for the stop block and went back to the freshly cleaned miter station to make another pile of aluminum chips. For the stop block, I just glued and screwed some plywood together and locked it down with another T-bolt and smaller star nut. Then it was time for test. For angled holes, I can just turn the fence around to support the piece, unlock the arms, and raise it up to the angle that I need. If I don't need the fence at all, I can store it behind the post just to keep it out of the way. I can already tell this is going to be a huge upgrade over the stock table, and I'm very happy with how it's all turned out so far. All right, that's going to do it for the table build. Next time we're going to come back in and build some storage for underneath the table. A little bit of a twist so we don't lose any capacity on the drill press itself. So keep an eye out for that. We'll see you then. Thanks for watching.